So, Alastair Campbell, I am thrilled that you've joined me on my podcast.
Okay.
And you are a journalist, a broadcaster, an author, a podcaster, a strategist, and an activist.
Mm-hmm.
And the things I take from that is the line that connects all of your roles is that you want to fight to improve the way we live in the world today.
That's a nice positive way of thinking about it. I think so. I think that, I think I do. I think that that's what my kind of activist sense comes from. I've done it in different ways at different periods of my life. I did start out in my professional life thinking that journalism was the way to do it. I also thought journalism was a lot of fun, which it
You're quite good at having fun, aren't you?
Yeah, most of the time. I do have a lot of fun, yeah. I do have a lot of unfun. I have a lot of bad times, but
We're going to get to that. Therapy works.
I tend to enjoy a lot of things. Yeah.
But where do you think the source of that? In some ways, it feels like a sort of an anger to fight for something that's better. What do you think the source of that is? Where, if you kind of look back, maybe at your childhood, your environment, or an experience, what is the thing that set that on fire, do you think?
I think it's very hard to answer that, because there's lots of things can pop into my head of things that I've thought, things that I've felt, incidents I can remember. I think if there's one thing, I've always... So I grew up in Yorkshire, in Keighley, till I was about 11. And my dad was a vet, and we lived...
Scottish, though.
Scottish vet, yeah. But we lived in this very nice house up at the top of the town. And to get into town, I had to walk through an area that was, pretty rough, mainly Asian immigrant community. And I think I was conscious very, very early on that they were a lot poorer than we were. I was also conscious at school of there being children there who were a lot poorer than we were. In fact, funny enough, I was talking yesterday, I've kept next to no friends from most of my childhood, but I have kept my best friend from primary school.
Have you? That's so nice.
And yeah, and he was, from a much more working class background. We were pretty middle class, my dad being a vet and so forth, and, living in this, really nice house and stuff. But I remember, sometimes being with him and thinking we're very different, even though we're very similar. And I think I've always felt a greater empathy with people like him than people like the people that I first came across when I went to university at Cambridge. I think I felt a greater empathy with the...
Are you still there? Somehow I've lost you. You've frozen. Oh no, there you are.
Yeah. I felt a greater
so
empathy
interesting, isn't it?
With those people in the Pakistani community that I was walking through than maybe, I don't know, other people that I might have come across. And I think then in journalism, I wasn't very political in a clearly defined way, actually, until I became a journalist, and then particularly meeting Fiona, my partner, and her family, who are very political. I always knew I was Labour, but it wasn't kind of, I didn't define it as such. Probably until my mid to early to mid 20s.
And what I kind of get from that is that there was an awareness of inequalities, and that gave you a discomfort. And then how that has played out has been very shaped by what's happened since, I guess, by meeting Fiona and then journalism and then meeting people and then working for Tony Blair. I don't know if there was stuff in between.
There was lots in between. I think the journalism definitely. Funny enough, It was one of Tony's predecessors, Neil Kinnock, who I actually met on a really bizarre kind of situation. I was becoming much more political, but I was a general news reporter. And when Neil was Labour leader, the Mirror they asked Neil and his family to get all their relatives together, and the Mirror put them up in this hotel in London. And there were about 100 of them, all coming up from Wales and around different parts of the world. And the centrepiece of the weekend, we're going to get them all on the roof of this hotel and just do a huge picture of here's Neil's whole clan kind of thing.
This is his tribe, yeah.
Yeah, and my job, I wasn't writing the thing at all. My job was basically to be around and make sure that no other newspapers found out what we were up to and what we were doing, and sort of protect this exclusive.
You're the bouncer.
Yeah, but it meant that I'll tell you exactly when it was the weekend of the Bradford City fire.
Oh my God.
Yeah, because it was also an early immersion in me of kind of spin doctoring, because when the fire happened, Maxwell, who at the time owned the Mirror, he phoned up and said he thought that he and Neil Kinnock should fly to Bradford together. Which was clearly a truly awful idea, which I knew straight away was an awful idea. Neil would have nothing to do with it. I think Neil went up there later on his own, or without any of that sort of stuff. And so I had to kind of manage this mad idea and keep Neil out of it and keep Maxwell at bay and so forth. But Neil was somebody that I talked to, got friendly with from there really, and got very friendly with his family. His kids were then teenagers, and we just became very friendly. And I think I realised through him that I had to make the step from new journalism into political journalism. And it was there, so that's what, I moved full-time into Westminster, covering Parliament, covering election campaigns and things like that. And then eventually, John Smith died, Tony Blair asked me to work for him. But I think the thing about inequality, I think it's more about, maybe that's too positive a way to look at it. I've always hated snobbishness, hierarchy, class, people feeling that they're superior because of their class. I've always had
looking down upon.
Yeah, exactly. I've never quite accepted that. Ricky Gervais had one of the funniest lines of ever last year when Johnson and Rees-Mogg and the other kind of Etonian crew were screwing everything up. And I remember Ricky Gervais did a tweet saying, "When is this country going to learn that the words 'went to Eton' should qualify you for absolutely nothing?" And I kind of feel that. So I've always been very anti-hierarchical, but I think it does come from a belief that we are, we should at least strive for some sort of equality. We know we're not, we can be cleverer than other people. We can be better at exploiting what the world gives us than other people. But it doesn't mean that we're automatically, because we're born into a certain level of society, that we're somehow better. And
that your background or your class isn't who you are, but that we're all innately human and deserve to be treated with value and respect and potential, I guess. So
I think the potential is the key.
Is it? Yeah, I agree. But if you don't have that as your environment to begin with, you don't trust in it in yourself. So the question I always ask a guest, and this is, I guess, particularly focusing on your external world and how that relates to your internal world, is tell me about a challenge you're facing or have had to overcome.
What now?
Yep. Or it can be had. It can be in the past, whichever you want to talk about.
It's funny, there are two that pop into my head immediately, and they both relate to alcohol. One, me.
Alcohol Awareness Week this week.
There you go. The first one relates to me, and the second one relates to my son, Callum. So I had this pretty full-on psychotic breakdown in the 1980s, where one of the consequences of which was that I was advised to stop drinking. And I stopped drinking for 13 years. Probably of a view that I was a recovering alcoholic. But then having sort of dabbled a bit 13 years after I'd stopped and not being terribly bothered by it, not getting drunk, not sort of, having one drink and feeling I had to have another. I think that was quite an important step on a journey that I hadn't even really acknowledged, where what I'd done in 1986 when I had the breakdown was that having got better and having felt stronger because I was succeeding in this business of stopping drinking, I could have felt I'd done what I needed to do. But actually, what I hadn't done was to recognise and face up to whatever it was that had driven me to be a problem drinker in the first place. And I don't think that really came until 2005, after I left Downing Street, when I was in a really bad place. I was I think the only way to define it is self-harming. I was punching myself a lot. I was banging my head against the wall quite a lot.
Oh, Alastair.
And that's when I started to see somebody, and really understand that I was, dealing on and off with very, very, very bad depression, which I think in the early days, leading up to my breakdown, I dealt with through drink. And then I dealt with through this obsessive need and desire not to drink, which I probably replaced with an obsessive need and desire to work all the time. And that just became a kind of more lucrative and more productive addiction.
But it's still an addiction, isn't it? Busyness is an addiction.
Yeah, for sure. And then in relation to my son, why that was...
Can I pause you before we talk about your son? Can I... Yeah. I feel very moved by your kind of honesty and openness and the kind of understanding that you're wanting to get out in the world about addiction, which is that it isn't the drunk who just wakes up and drinks all day. There are many forms of addiction. But actually the question isn't what is the addiction, whether it's work, drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, looking at your phone. The question is, what is the pain? And until you deal with the source of the pain, you can't deal with the addiction. But also that we have this kind of very limited narrative of addiction, which means that a lot of people don't get the help and treatment that they need. And and because denial is such a key part of addiction, we kid ourselves and tell ourselves a story. I'm all right, I'm fine, I'm functioning. And you were functioning, very high functioning, but white knuckling it, dry drunking.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I'm guessing your next question might be, so what is the pain? And that's the bit I don't really know the answer to.
Don't you?
Not really, no. When I've talked, as I have at length, to my psychiatrist, David Sturgeon, who I see less than I used to, because I think I am in a better place now. But
you sound calm.
I felt yeah, but when I was seeing him regularly, like quite a lot, when I realised from 2005, probably for about a decade or so, when I realised I had to really, really work at trying to get to the bottom of all this. And I think he felt there must be something I was holding back. There was some sort of dark
trauma
secret in my childhood, or something I'd done, or whatever. Now, the two things that get closest to it, but I don't think they are it, but I think they are part of it. One is that my dad, who I said was a vet, had a very bad accident when I was about 10, or a bit younger. And as a result, we had to move from Yorkshire to Leicester, okay? Because he changed his career to adapt to the fact that physically he was very different than what he was before in terms of his strength and fitness. So he wasn't like paralysed or anything like that. It's just that it was a big accident, and it took quite a long time to recover, and he felt he couldn't do the 24/7 work of being a country vet. So he joined the Ministry of Agriculture and became a government vet, and it was much more calm and 9 to 5 and all that stuff. And I think that move troubled me because I felt that I was dislocated physically, emotionally. It's quite interesting, my obsession with Burnley Football Club, who, by the way, have just lost 5-2 to Sheffield United. I'm sure you don't care, but I do.
I care. I'm sorry. I'll swear with you if you like. The fuckers.
Okay, that is fine. Fuckers. And the further away I've ever moved from the north, the stronger this pull, which I express through the football, feels. Because I don't have any family up there at all, because we all moved. And my parents were both Scottish. They had no roots there. It was just that that's where we were all born, myself, my 2 brothers and my sister. And there's only me and my sister left now. And so I think that was part of it. Then the other one that comes to mind as a possible thing, but this happened, but by the time this happened, I was already, I think, descending into problem alcohol in my teens, frankly. And when I was about 18, my eldest brother Donald was in the army, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now that was definitely the point at which I became utterly fascinated by mental ill health. But I think also it was like a huge thing for me, obviously for him, changed his life, but also for me and for the whole family. And I think a part of my life has always been, I get these moments of kind of imposter syndrome. I get moments where I think, what have I done to deserve the life that I've had and the experiences I get, the career that I've had, when Donald got booted out of the army for having schizophrenia, and then, didn't really have the sort of life that I've had. Now, he had an amazing life on many levels, especially considering his condition. I remember at his funeral, there were so many people there who, he had loads of really good friends. He was a great musician. He had a lot going for him.
And he died by suicide, did he?
No, he didn't die by suicide. He died of respiratory failure, but that's partly because of the drugs he was on for 40 odd years.
Schizophrenia.
Yeah. So that was. But apart from that, I mean, I've had pain of. I can remember, again, when I was about 7, on the island where my dad came from, where we used to go on holiday every summer, Tiree. And I can remember there being this great drama going on because somebody who lived up the road was being sectioned and taken away. And he was a crofter, and I remember the police and the ambulance being there and going to get this guy off his tractor, and he was driving the tractor with his daughter on his lap, and they had to take the daughter away. And I remember being absolutely fascinated by that. But the thing that when I'd been to kind of sessions where I talked to people about, so for example, I did a documentary for the BBC, and there was this guy called Ian Roulier who I interviewed, who was on this psilocybin course.
The cracking up, that documentary.
That's right, yeah. And no, Me and My Depression. Me and My Depression. Yeah, and Ian was on this hallucinogenics treatment, and anyway, so I interviewed him about it and how it'd gone and what it was like, and I watched him under the effects and all this sort of stuff. When he told me his childhood, it was just so horrific about the level of abuse that he suffered at the hands of his father and all sorts of other stuff that was just really, really terrible. And you can sort of go, well, I completely get why you get really, really bad depression. I don't have anything like that.
But I think it's very, as a therapist, I think we, always comparing us insides with other people's insides, and then what happens to them is incredibly unhelpful. And also, we're born with this cocktail of genetic predisposition, environment, supporting connection, and what happens to us. and how that creates fault lines or protective factors that enable us to be resilient or vulnerable to the kind of brickbats of life. And I mean, I may have got this wrong, and I've never met you before, but what I've understood is that early uprooting from where you belonged, where you felt safe, where you knew where you were from and what you were doing and what you were about, and that your father was strong with a purpose and meaning and doing something that had real kind of, you could see the value it was, to a place where you were alien. And I would imagine that feeling of uprootedness would bring you fear. And that fear then destabilizes the different core identities that we all have of who I am, and am I of worth or am I not of worth, and am I in danger because I'm outside the tribe, or am I safe because I'm inside the tribe? And that can grow subtly inside us, can't it, as a kind of disturbance. And then with your brother's diagnosis, that was a massive loss and trauma, I think, along with your dad's accident, that all of you in the family experienced. And the whole family system probably got tilted on its axis, including your mum, who was then coping with her husband, who is no longer the same, although functioning, and her son, who she must have been incredibly worried about. So that the safety you felt in your body and in your mind and around your kitchen table didn't feel as safe. And then what I find interesting is you go into roles that literally throw you into danger every minute of every day. Politics.
Yeah.
I mean, what the fuck?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about the uprooting thing is that I think there is something.
Does that make sense or not?
Possibly, because I mean, I think it's interesting, for example, that when you asked the question, that's the first thing I raised. Now maybe I've rationalised that over time. I don't know, but the other thing is, the other thing that fits that theme in a way is that growing up, I always felt 100% Scottish as a child. Because of my parents, because of the fact that I love Scotland, because of the fact that I learned the bagpipes, because of the fact that my dad was a Gaelic speaker. So I felt very Scottish in England. But the minute we went to Scotland, we were seen a bit as outsiders because my parents had left Scotland and because we were growing up with English accents. So I think there was a propensity to sort of uprootedness anyway. And I've never really felt like it's interesting, for example, that I'm not a member of any clubs. The idea of going to the House of Lords just fills me with absolute dread. I've turned it down several times. I just couldn't do it. And I think it's this sort of inside.
The Labour Party is that is not a club.
Well, at the moment I'm out of that. No, I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier. I think the Labour Party is the vehicle that I saw as the best vehicle to make the sort of change in the world that I believe in. And I still actually feel that. I think there are other ways of doing it. But I think if you're talking about politics, I think that's still the best way to do it if you're British. But no, so I'm somebody who, so for example, when we did move to Leicester, I remember once I got called in to see the head teacher because the teachers had complained. We had a school uniform, which I always wore, and it was a black jacket, a white shirt and a tie, and I always wore it. I wasn't rebellious like that. However, I also always wore my Burnley scarf and a blue anorak. And I never took it off. Now, that is obviously me saying I don't belong here and being very defiant about that. Now, what that says about anything else, I just don't know. But yeah,
there is a link about belonging, isn't there, that you're kind of getting at, and feeling alienated, feeling outside in some way.
Yeah, and by the way, not always wanting to be accepted is the other thing. I think one of the reasons that I look, I mean, I'm obviously, quotes, part of the establishment because I've, worked for the government and I've worked in positions that are very kind of establishment positions. But I think I've still got a pretty strong anti-establishment streak. I mean, I'll give you another example that I don't know what this says either, but I find it impossible to congratulate people when they get an honour. Including really close friends that get Sir this and MBE, OBE this. I just think it's such bullshit, and I can't kind of surmount that.
No,
I can't surmount it. I can't.
Sort of disgusts you.
Now, it kind of does, and because it feels. It's back to this thing about the sort of being anti-hierarchical, and what was extraordinary was that when I was working at Downing Street, part of my job as the Prime Minister's official spokesman, my job was to brief the media on the honours list, and have to sit there and say how marvellous it was that 16% were of black and ethnic minorities. And, we had more teachers than ever, and da da da. And listen, I'm not a killjoy, so I get the fact that it gives a lot of meaning and purpose and pleasure to lots of other people. But to me, I've always felt it's part of the cementing of this kind of very class-based hierarchical structure that I don't think has done Britain that much good. And I think if you look at where we are now with Brexit and all that stuff, and the kind of horrors of the right wing and the rhetoric of these people on the right and so forth, I think we're still living with this massive overhang of an inability to let go of the idea that we have this great empire around the world, and we're world beating at everything. We're not anymore, and live with it and get on with your life
and wake up to the reality that we're actually living.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's what sort of. But whether that, there's no doubt at all that I do. Although obviously, there's a rhythm to my depressions, but there's not necessarily an obvious rhyme or reason. There is a rhythm.
Tell me the rhythm.
Well, the rhythm is that I can go for quite long periods feeling 100% okay most of the time.
Like talking to me now, you feel very vibrant, alive, connected.
I'd say at the moment,
well.
I'd say on my kind of depression scale, which goes from utterly manic and out of control here to suicide here, okay, I would say I'm about there at the moment today. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
My favourite place is about there.
A little bit more up.
A little bit more up, and a little bit more energy, and a little bit more drive, and then I get out and I do loads and loads of stuff. Give you an example. I mean, I agreed to do this today, but actually I think partly, I don't know this, I haven't rationalised it, but I think partly I'd said to myself I was actually going to go out this afternoon and buy a few things for Christmas, right? Because I hate doing anything last minute, and but I think this is all part of me putting that off because I don't actually feel like going out.
Energetic.
Yeah, I've got energy, but I'm not buzzing, and so. But so that's the rhythm, is that I'll go up and down on that scale, and then.
And you don't know what sets you off. So there are environmental things that you know. I mean, I know you do a lot of exercise like cold water swimming and your bagpipes and cycling and running, and that must stabilise you. Yeah,
well, swimming every day at the moment, cold water swimming.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Proper workout a couple of times a week. I do, walk a lot, just going around the place. Music. I've got loads and loads of different things I do to trees, But I'd say that with the rhythm. So, for example, Philip, and I forget. I think like a lot of depressors, I forget when I have been depressed. But I was talking to Fiona about it last night, and she was saying that I say it's been a while since I was talking about, actually, I was having a medication review, and I was so before I went, I said, when was the last time I had a really bad one? It was ages ago, wasn't it? She said, no, it was about 5 weeks ago.
I remember that. It was that you told us on your brilliant podcast, which we will talk about. But
so that was.
But you have a kind of mind blank.
Not a mind blank, but it always feels, once I'm through it, as I get through it, I get quite, I don't think it's manic, but I get very positive and very energetic, and I feel great. I'm here then. But when once I'm through it, it's kind of gone. And it doesn't mean, so like, for example, when I wrote my novel about depression, All in the Mind, it's the only time in my life when I've been sitting thinking, God, I wish I was fucking depressed. I want to be depressed because I can't remember what it feels like. I can't describe it. And I had to sort of, and of course it's like watching the kettle boil, isn't it? I actually wondered whether that the cure for depression is to say, I'm desperate to be depressed. Make me depressed, for fuck's sake. But no, so, and then I'll go through some triggers. For example, the start of holidays are always very tricky for me. Lack of sleep and overwork.
Stopping the busyness of working.
Well, it's thinking that you should when you're not as well. That can happen to me. I can go on holiday and, I'll go on holiday to sort of write a book or, and then I think the other tiredness for me is a really big thing. I've really got to watch that. If I get physically and mentally tired, that can tip. And the external environment. I mean, I've got to say, I know people use the word, oh God, it's so depressing in the wrong way, but sometimes I will say about the state of the world, God, it's so depressing.
It is.
And I literally mean that, I think, when Johnson was Prime Minister, I mean, I think some people thought I was a little bit obsessed, but it really did have an effect on me. I felt sick at the idea that he was the Prime Minister.
And so angry and powerless.
Well, the other thing is, I'll tell you the other thing that's a big part of my problems, I think, and this is something I have talked about with my psychiatrist, is that I might feel powerless a lot of the time, but a particular problem that somebody like me has is that an awful lot of people think I have power.
Yes,
and that
you have, and even more so since the success of your podcast, because you have so many listens and. Yeah,
but I saw, when I described that sort of plunge that I had when I was talking up in Scotland, the one that you mentioned. I am convinced that's what triggered it. It was a guy in the audience who said, "Listen, I love your podcast. You and Rory Stewart, you obviously agree about more than you disagree. You have a responsibility to start a new party, or you have a responsibility."
People want you to be Prime Minister, don't they?
Well, some do, but it's like, but you feel this responsibility, and then, but I also feel an inability to step right into the fray in a way that I can't control. At the moment, I feel I have control of my life. If you're...
And is the stepping into it, is that some of the imposter syndrome? And by the way, I haven't forgotten to talk about your son. He's just up there waiting to be called in.
No, it's not that. I don't think it's the imposter syndrome. I think it's the... No, I think it's the feeling that I do what I do now, and I did what I did. In doing what I did, I think I came very close to losing my mind again. And
that's terrifying.
I think listen, it's fine because I got through it. And I mean, I did lose my mind in 1986. There's no doubt about that. But then I think what was happening in 2005 was getting to that point. And so now, look, I think I probably could go and do some big job, go back into the political front line. I think I could do that. But at the same time, I'm thinking, why risk it when there are other people who can do it and are doing it, and also when you can make a difference in a different way. So that's maybe me just making a logical case for my own indolence, but I think. But
actually, I think there's truth in it. If your purpose on this planet is to leave the world a better place than when you born, maybe, you know, and all of what you did, the jobs that you had and the roles that you did led to this podcast. The rest is politics. And with Rory, his history led to what he did. Maybe you can shape the world and have more influence through that than being a politician.
No, I don't buy that. I think we can have a lot of fun. I think we can have success. I think we can interest and amuse people, and I think we can help to shape the debate. And I think the best thing we've done is to show people that it's possible to have a debate that's serious and sensible, and lots of people want to be part of it. But I don't kid myself that ultimately, if you really, really want to change the world, you have to have political power, or you have to have financial power. No, you can campaign. I mean, you can make a difference. And I would say on the mental health
You're a big campaigner. Yeah.
Well, I've moved. I think I've moved the dial. But it's not the same as being able to... Right, but it's not the same as being able to say, I am the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and today I'm announcing that we're building an entire new network of psychiatric institutions around the country because we need to meet the need. That's power. And that's you can only really get that when you're in elected politics. But the other thing that came through and still comes through on the rare occasions I still see David Sturgeon is this conflict. I think this is we identified as maybe a source of the pain as well, is that I live in a constant conflict between the concept of self and service. That I am, I don't mean selfish in the kind of conventional sense, but I'm quite self-centered. I'm quite, I've got quite a high opinion of myself. I think that my opinions matter. And I also want to have a good life, okay? So that's the self bit. And I want to do what I do in the way that I do it. I don't want to be told by other people how to do it. And at the same time, I am driven by a sense of duty and service to others. And, you know, Fiona will say that one of the worst things about my time with working with Tony Blair is that, you know, if any time of day or night something needed to be done to help and facilitate the project on which we were working, I felt I had to do it, and I still feel that now. If I'm engaged in something, and that is a kind of permanent conflict.
But could I reframe that conflict? Because I don't think they're necessarily in opposition.
No, they might not be. I
think if you can accommodate all of that. So it's an and an and an and. That I mind about myself and my life and the quality of my life, and believe I have opinions that are worthy of listening to. I believe that there's a role for me to play in service and duty for the things that I believe in, and that I have a part to play in my life. And all of it's never kind of equal or simple, but they can sit side by side. Sometimes they bump into each other, but they are what makes you whole. They're not divided chunks that one has to overcome the other one.
No, but I think if I was absolutely driven by the sense of duty and service, absolutely driven by it, there's no way that I would live the life I lead now. It's the self bit that stops me doing the things that people like that guy in Scotland want me to do. So even if it's not a real conflict,
but I think that is a complete misrepresentation of how we operate as human beings. You can't spend and cost yourself out of the equation in what you're doing. The two are entirely interconnected and interlinked, like the mind-body is one unit. You can't cut yourself out of the doing you.
No, but the choices that you make, I have made a choice to live the life that I live, knowing that there are other choices I could have made, which I think would have put the tilt on the balance more into the duty service space. I just think it's a kind of, maybe conflict's the wrong word, but it's an equation that I'm...
Attention. It's attention.
Yeah, it's a tension. It's a tension that runs through me all the time. And I think it explains, for example, why I'm not very good at having a good time. There's a part of
Being on holiday when you have a breakdown,
yeah,
for instance.
yeah. There's a part of me that thinks that we all worry too much about having a good time as opposed to having a good world.
I mean, I would really like to do a bit of therapy on where that comes from, because that must be your childhood.
Really?
You'd have thought. I mean, your belief system about holidays and work ethic and all of that, those values come from one's childhood, don't they?
Yeah, but my parents, so like, for example, my parents, they threw parties and they used to have these big kind of gatherings, and I'm just not. I'm not that sort of person. I didn't really enjoy birthday parties as a child, and I don't enjoy them now.
Didn't like the attention.
Don't know. I didn't. No, I'm talking not just about my birthday parties. I'm talking about any birthday parties. I just thought, why do we do this all the time? Every weekend seemed to be another bloody birthday party. And likewise, with. I'll tell you one thing I really.
But you like people.
I do like people. I like finding out about people, like getting to know people, I like observing people, like talking with people. But I'm not good. I'll tell you when I'm not good. I'm not good in situations where everybody's meant to feel the same thing. Weddings, New Year.
That's the outsider in you.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. Or even something like the, when there's a big football tournament on. I remember, recently in the Euros, and this partly is back to the Scottish English thing. Yeah, whatever. It's like, when suddenly people who have got no interest in football at all, suddenly they feel they have to express an interest in, whether Alan Shearer's playing well, or, they don't care. So shut up. Just, don't get bulldozed into feeling you have to have a view because it's the thing that everybody at that point has a view on. I guess it's about wanting your own space, really.
Yeah. And a tension between belonging and being a part of, but also being your own person and allowing yourself to be your own person. Yeah. Can we talk about your son and alcoholism and addiction?
Yes, the reason why I kind of relate that to the other challenge, my own challenge, is because I feel that it was worse in a way to see it happening, but also I don't think I handled it very well. I remember once having a conversation with a friend of mine who was saying, we've got this nightmare with Callum, he's clearly got a drink problem, won't face up to it, And I remember this friend of mine, he's quite a well-known person, but he said, but it's great, because, you've got the experience, you know what he's going through, and therefore you can help more than most people would. And I found that this wasn't the case. I found that I was saying and doing all the things that people used to say and do to me that made it worse. Stop drinking.
So interesting that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're being weak-willed.
Just, you don't have to do that. Why don't you just stay in? And now, look, I think both Fiona and I were in our own way incredibly supportive, and I think Callum recognises that. But it was really, I think it was probably the most difficult period of my life, actually. Even worse than my own breakdown, because the thing about my own breakdown is that I think that was worse for Fiona than it was for me in a way.
Yeah.
I was away with the fairies, Whereas with Callum, he was in this very, very vulnerable state. And
I actually don't think there's anything much worse than seeing your children suffer. I think that is one of the most unbearable things in life, and why often.
But it's also, if you're like
we say the wrong things because we so desperately want it to stop, and so we can't let them be who they are and suffer in the way they need to.
But you see, when both Fiona and I are the sort of people who, if we see a problem, we want to fix it. And we're quite good at it. We're quite good at fixing problems. Fiona, both emotionally and practically. Me, more in the emotion. I'm not a practical person, but I can see a situation. I'm good in a crisis. I can grip things and I can change things. But something like that, as you say, you want to do the right thing, you want to change them. But I tell you, it was again, I was seeing David a lot during that period because it was so grim. And he said a couple of things that were really helpful and really insightful. The first was, he said, you can't change another person, you can only change yourself and your attitude to that person.
Yeah.
Which actually was difficult, but it was useful. And then the second thing he said, they reached a point where we kept giving Callum warnings and ultimatums, but then when push came to shove, we, didn't really deliver on them. And he said, "You really
tough
got
love,
to do
that one."
He said, "You've got to do that. If you don't do that, this is going to end a disaster." And I said, "But hold on, what if he arrives home completely smashed out of his brain, and I refuse to let him in the house, and he wanders off and he falls in the canal and
he dies?" Yeah.
And David said, "Well, he might, and he won't be there, but you can't be there 24 hours a day." And my point is, you are feeding the addiction by giving him warnings, giving him ultimatums, and then not seeing them through. So one night, a few days later, we're lying in bed, middle of the night, doorbell goes, go downstairs, Callum lost his keys, lost his wallet, drunk, and I just didn't let him in. And
wow, God, that must have been one of the hardest things you've ever done.
It was incredibly hard. And who knows whether we've got a good relationship. He's not, touch wood, he's not had a drink for almost a decade now.
Wow.
But
was that his turning point? Was that his rock bottom when you didn't let him in?
No, it got worse.
Wasn't that simple?
No,
how could it ever be?
No, the rock bottom came not long afterwards, but it came when he got into a bit of trouble at work, and he realised, he put it this way, he reached the point of realising, and we'd had this place lined up. He'd been to a rehab place in Ireland, which didn't work. Well, I say it didn't work, but
He wasn't ready or whatever.
No. We had this other place. Somebody had recommended this place in Scotland, and he went there. It was very difficult at first. He wouldn't cooperate. He was breaking all the rules and all that stuff. But
I'm not an alcoholic.
Yeah, and they're not handling it right, and they don't know what they're doing and all that stuff. But eventually, he kind of, and it's all about relationships. I think he found a couple of people in there that he really liked and that he trusted, and he's not had a drink since. So, that
wow.
was. But now and again, as with my drink, I think like all of us, with whatever it is that made us drink in the first place and made us want to kind of, obliterate ourselves, that's what you have to kind of dig deeper on. And I think we do it. I think if you've been in those sort of situations, you probably do it for the rest of your life in different ways.
So today, asking you that question, dealing with having a predisposition or having a kind of inclination to be an addict, you have to deal with that. Sometimes more on some days, but like today, it's a tougher day. And is that what you want people to realise, that it's not over? That you, yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know what I want people to realise. I'm not that bothered what people realise or don't realise about me. What I think I can do quite usefully is speak about this kind of stuff so that other people can think it might relate to them, particularly those who are refusing to recognise they might have a problem, or because unless you recognise a problem, you're never going to help yourself with it. And I think a lot of
what you don't face, you can't fix, right?
Yeah, exactly. What it's like. Sorry to keep banging on about Brexit, but it is so evident that Brexit is going very badly wrong, right? And yet the politicians refuse to acknowledge that. Well, they're not going to fix it. You're not going to fix this Northern Ireland Protocol until you recognise it's a problem. You're not going to fix the trade arrangements with Europe unless you recognise that it's doing damage. And it's the same with So, I would argue they're addicted to absolute bullshit based on their kind of populist nationalist nonsense. And the problem with their addiction is it damages the whole country.
Yes.
But I think, I think it's about forcing yourself as an individual to. And listen, we don't get it right. You're a therapist. I could talk to you. You could come to some conclusion. I could see somebody else tomorrow who would have a different conclusion. Somebody else who might ask me the question you asked me in a different way, and I'll need to give them a different answer. You have a different conclusion. True. In the end, it's a kind of never-ending process where you have to just try and work things out.
And I think that is right. But the key, what you do, that I guess keeps you on that spectrum, that you can kind of bring yourself back nearer the middle, is to support yourself through the process and be aware of what your process is.
Yeah.
And work on it. Like, this isn't something that you can just... So it sounds like from your breakdown in the 80s to the one in 2005, you basically shut it down, screwed the lid, and hoped that it was going to go away. But since then, and that's many years, 17 years, you've kind of recognised this is something you have to deal with and face. And some days are good, some days are bad.
Exactly.
But you have to find ways of supporting yourself. So what are the things that support you? So if you can feel yourself tilting, do you have to go through it? Or are there things that you can protect you and pull you back a bit?
I can often pull myself back, and often I can't. So I don't think you have to go through it. I have a sense of my own relationship with my depression now. So I can feel when I know it's going to be bad. I really feel it very strongly, and it's almost like a.
Do you feel the Jaws music, the doom doom?
No, I don't feel that. I feel this kind of physical presence somewhere up there coming towards me.
Malevolent.
And I know it's going to. So I describe it as a horrible dark jelly, and it's going to come into my veins, and it's just going to flood out all the energy.
Contaminate you.
Just drag me down and make me feel
drag you down.
Bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, so and if it's like that, I used to try and fight it off, and now I don't. I just think, okay, let's, so that's at the bad scale. But then if it's like waking up...
And can I just check with the not fighting it off? In some ways, it's the paradoxical theory of change. If you accept it and allow it to come through you, it then goes through you. Whereas if you kind of battle against it, it grips you for longer. Yeah.
Well, what I found is that when I was battling against it, I was doing it in various different ways. So I would do it by denying it. So if somebody said, you don't look yourself today, what's wrong? I say, nothing's wrong. Absolutely nothing. Whereas now I say, I feel like shit. If I would, I would busy myself, but with stuff which I now recognise probably made it worse. And it became like I could push it away for a little while, but eventually it was kind of going to get me. But that's rare. They're rarer now. What happens more now? And I met this wonderful woman in Canada who this was the centerpiece of the documentary. Was this jam jar concept that she gave me, which is basically that you have to see your life as a jam jar, which is a mixture of genes at the bottom and then your life experience. And if it gets out of control, the jam jar explodes and you're ill. And instead of undoing all the stuff in the jam jar, your life, grow the jam jar with the things that you know, which you know can help you. So my jam jar now includes, and I have it in my head all the time. And I've actually physically got a jam jar.
That's amazing.
But in fact, you can probably see it. It's just behind me.
We can share it on the show notes, can't we? I've seen it on on YouTube. It's a long. It looks a bit like a willy.
That's the draw. That's exactly what it looks like. So, and so mine goes FFF, which is Fiona Family Friends Relationships, MA Meaningful Activity,
Nice.
which is work and change the world.
Yeah.
Then I go my fundamentals: sleep, diet, exercise.
The 4 pillars of
Then I go
equilibrium.
Yeah, and then and by the way, they're things I never used to take seriously ever. Exercise was a waste of time.
Really?
Sleep was a waste of time.
Like you sleep when you die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what can you achieve when you're asleep? Nothing. That was my kind of thinking, which helped lead to the breakdown in the 80s. And then I go into what I call the really personal stuff. So that's Burnley Football Club, bagpipes, my dog, my bike. Then I've got music, music not the news, books not newspapers. So if I'm depressed, I don't listen to the news.
No, nor do I.
But I will read a book. Right, but I will read a book. And then I'm into the thematic stuff, creativity, curiosity.
I love all this.
And so anyway, it goes on like that. And I'm up to
Have you got a picture? Can I see the picture?
I've got it
I just
somewhere.
love this so much. It should be as posters around the world.
Hold on.
It should, seriously. I'm drawing it as you write. I've got the F's. Friends, family, Fiona.
There you are.
Meaning and purpose.
There you go, there it is.
Pillars.
Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see. It does literally look like a willy.
I know. It was very accidental.
Very accidentally.
No, I've got them all. I've got
friends, Fiona, family, friends, meaning and purpose. Pillars, I call it pillars. Sleep, exercise.
Sleep, exercise,
bagpipes.
diet, Burnley Football Club, music, bagpipes, creativity, curiosity, David, and medication.
So he's at the top.
No, well, he's at the bottom
this isn't
in a way. Yeah, this is an order. And then down here are the things that I add. Tree of the day. So these are additions since I've done it. Tree of the day, the dog, nice. Sky, my bike, and landscapes. And I've also added the German.
Fantastic.
I've also added the German language in recent weeks.
Because it takes your mind to a different place, right? Different way of being.
Because I used to speak fluent German and I lost it, and during COVID I got it back again.
Amazing.
So now, if I'm dipping, I will sometimes get this out and I'll look at it and think, right, what can I do that speaks to Fiona, family, friends being a priority? So it might be just that I just do something nice, meaningful activity. I'll try and do some work. Sleep. If I feel tired, I'll go to bed. Diet. Don't drink. Don't eat shit. Eat lots of fruit. Drink lots of water. Exercise. Even if I feel like not good leaving the house, I can go. I've got a bike, an exercise bike there. I just
get
do
out
half
there.
an hour and there. Music. Playing music. Listening to music. Creativity. I write every day. Curiosity. That's about just constantly telling yourself, I need to learn something today that I didn't know yesterday. And I try and do one of them, at least, something related.
That's so brilliant. I'd love a photograph of it that we could put on the notes.
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
I've taken up nearly an hour of your very precious time.
Very precious.
Do you want to talk about your podcast? Are you loving it? I mean, or we need to end. You choose.
Yeah. I do enjoy it. I mean, I don't get massively excited about work things.
Really?
I do enjoy it.
That is not my take on you.
No, I'm very competitive. But when you say, do I enjoy it? I mean, this goes back to the thing about not enjoying kind of. Look, I'm very competitive. So when I agreed to do it, and had the idea of getting Rory involved, and then realised that something quite good was happening here, I was absolutely determined to make it the country's top
Pumped.
podcast.
Yeah.
No, just determined.
And you bloody did it.
Yeah. And
number one today.
Yeah. Top 3 episodes in the country this week.
Unbloody believable.
Yeah, but what I like about it is that it's because I think the thing is we haven't really talked about this, but I definitely have a kind of relevance issue.
Okay.
And I think the media kid themselves if they think that they kind of run the world and they control the world. They have a lot of influence. So I'm not pretending that a podcast can sort of, transform British political life. But I think we can have an impact, we can have an influence. And I like that. I enjoy the fact of it. I enjoy the fact that it makes me, so for example, recording, I know this week that we're recording on Tuesday, so I will spend part of tomorrow thinking through what are the things we should talk about, what do I need to read, what research should I do, is there something a bit offbeat?
Gives you structure and purpose.
And it gives me the excuse that means that if I'm sort of scrolling through social media or watching the news, I'm not just doing it to pass the time. I'm doing it because I'm sort of trying to work out, so I give myself the excuse.
What the hell's going on?
Work. Yeah. Exactly. And I think the other thing it does, it makes the feedback we get from listeners is incredible. They give you really great, somebody sent me a thing to read today. It was actually about mental health and stigma, which I've just been sitting around all morning reading. So it's like, yeah, I really have enjoyed it. And it's just become a little bit of a new lease of life. I mean, I've never had anything. I've never had anything. Even at the height of my kind of political life, with Tony Blair, because I was always either with him and he was the main guy, or I was kind of trying to do things that got me out of that for a bit, like go abroad or go to football, whatever it might be. So, but with this podcast, I promise you, I was on the tube the other day. In the carriage, 3 people came up and said they were listening to the podcast on the way to work. In the same carriage. I mean, and walking around Hampstead Heath. Love the podcast. It's like, I've never had, we had 6 million downloads in the last 4 weeks.
That is unbelievable. So as much as you say work isn't I don't know what you said. You said something about work isn't what excites you, something like that. I can't quite remember now.
No. It was. I would. So you said you must be really enjoying it. I don't see it as.
Oh yeah.
It's back to the point.
Okay.
I don't see it as being about enjoyment. I do enjoy it, but that's kind of not the point. I don't do it because I want to enjoy it. I do it because...
You do it because you want...
I think it's quite a good thing to do, and it might have an impact somewhere. So I'm writing a book at the moment. That, funny enough, I was starting to write before the podcast came along. And it's the working title is "But What Can I Do?" It's a kind of guide to politics for the powerless. And
that's fantastic.
So I think it's in that space that I think the podcast is hitting a mark. It's obviously people who are interested in politics, but we get loads of feedback from people who say actually they've latched onto it because they feel it explains politics to them in a way they'd never really understood.
That's what I hear
so
from
I just love
everybody
the
and
idea.
heard.
I love the idea that there's somebody out there who I'll probably never meet who listens to it and thinks, God, that's really interesting, I could do that. And then in 30 years' time...
That's changing the world.
Young woman... Yeah, you see, so let's just say some young woman is listening to it aged 18 and thinks, I've never thought about politics, but you know what, I might do that. And then they end up being Prime Minister in 30 years. That'd be great, as long as they're Labour. Don't want any,
Of course.
don't want any Tory prime ministers. But enough of them.
I mean, that is quite a good place to stop, isn't it?
Good.
But
should I go
that's
to
a
Hampstead
lovely
or
place
not?
to stop.
Shall I wander up to Hampstead or not?
100% go to Hampstead.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll do that. And I'll send you a
Thank
picture.
you so much.
All
Will you
right.
send me a
I'm
picture?
glad we got it.
And of your willy. Not your willy. I didn't really mean to say that. The jar.
Do you mean the real jar or that? You mean this?